Hello everyone, welcome to another video by Ampro Engineering. The star of today's show is going to be the Tamiya Rising Fighter. For those of you who aren't familiar with this buggy, this thing is old school. I don't mean that it's an old buggy, it wasn't released all that long ago. What I mean is that the design of this thing is ancient. What we basically have here is a grasshopper. In fact, there are certain designs by companies like Nico and Tyco that are infinitely better than what we're looking at here. Does that make this a bad buggy? Absolutely not. This is a very fun to drive entry-level buggy along the same bloodline. In fact, it's the exact same bloodline as the Grasshopper, the Hornet, the Grasshopper 2, and the Super Hornet. In fact, if we dive a little deeper, you may notice that cosmetically, the vehicle is effectively a Super Hornet. There are some upgrades here to this one here. I did add these little bosses onto the body to accept headlights. Unfortunately, when Tamiya produced this car, they omitted the bosses for the front lights, which is kind of a crime in my book. I mean, they look so adorable with that, and now you kind of remove it. A little bit unfortunate. These little slots on the cowls, again, are also some of my design. They are inserts that go into the body, but you can see the similarity of the shells. In fact, the biggest difference is that they chopped off the wing here and went ahead and mounted it separately at the rear. Interestingly enough, if we pull the bodies off, the chassis are not similar. They're exactly the same. This is the Grasshopper 2 chassis, exact same one that the Super Hornet uses. The difference we find is at the rear. Whereas the Super Hornet has the gearbox lifted directly out of the Midnight Pumpkin, the Rising Fighter has a transmission pulled out of the Mad Fighter, which is another Tamiya two-wheel drive buggy, kind of along these lines, with a more advanced, and I say more advanced very loosely, chassis. I'm a massive fan of this style of buggy. You know the type. This is the front swing arm suspension with, I think Tamiya called it the rigid rolling rear axle, which means that the rear axle is literally one axle. There's no independent suspension here. And there is I'm going to pull this off real quick. There is a little slide here that will allow the rear axle to articulate exactly as the Super Hornet, Grasshopper 2, and Hornet would have done. Now, if you are looking for one of these to kind of mess about with, you can find these on eBay, brand new, very inexpensive. I actually bought this used. I'm not a huge fan of new things because I like to drive my stuff. I think I paid 40 bucks used for this car. The Super Hornet you can also get for relatively inexpensive. There are a couple of things that are better on the Rising Fighter than the Super Hornet. One of the things being the rear suspension. What's interesting about this design, now, I have to mention that what we're looking at here in red, this is all my design. The factory rear suspension, here's another transmission. The factory rear suspension has the base of the shock bolt right here. And what happens is the car ends up looking like this. The transmission drops down dramatically and the car looks like a stink bug. As you can see here in the picture, I'm not I don't know. It looks weird to me. You might love it, that's great. For me, I decided to kind of make a rear brace similar to the style of the Grasshopper 2, and we'll take a look a little bit closer at this as well. What is neat about this suspension is that if you press the rear shocks down, the suspension will fully compress, and it works very nicely. In fact, even though the car sits lower, and these sliders are actually, they go down versus the Super Hornet where they go up, you still do not come into contact down here with the suspension design. These are Super Hornet rear shocks, which can be pilfered from the Blitzer Beetle, I believe, in the Stadium Blitzer. In fact, I believe that's exactly where I got these. These shocks are not required for this upgrade. You can use the factory pogo sticks, the blue ones, but these are exactly 90 millimeters center to center. So if you find like a 90mm shock, you should be good to go. Another upgrade that I did on this car was purely cosmetic. The standard wheels and tires, these are actually the standard tires. These are the standard wheels. Okay, here are the fronts, and here are the rears. These are a very common Tamiya wheel option for many of their cars. So this is what you will find on the Rising Fighter. For me, I couldn't even look at these. Again, some people may love them. I don't even know what to do with these. Where's my trash can? That's what you do with them. So once I got rid of those, I decided to go ahead and snag me some front wheels off of the Wild One, which I think look awesome. Same offset. The tires went right on. I think they look great. Unfortunately, this is a Rising Fighter rear wheel. The main difference is the hub on this car. So the hub, unlike the other Tamiyas, you can't just use an adapter and like toss this onto a Grasshopper 2 or a Hornet. The main problem is the offset. This rear axle really protrudes quite a bit further than the standard Hornet one. We can see here how much further the Hornet output protrudes versus the Rising Fighters. So I had a problem here where I simply couldn't attach the Wild One rear wheel. So I took some artistic liberty and went ahead and designed this rear wheel. As you can tell, cosmetically they are designed to match exactly. And you may be thinking, well, I made a mistake on the rear wheel. The Wild One, the Super Hornet, etc. Have smaller circles inside the wheel. So you kind of get this appearance here. I don't like to be bound by what Tamiya has done. I think this looks quite good. You know, that's how my Super Hornet is. But I decided I wanted to be a little bit different, and I simply made it an exact clone of the fronts. And, you know, it works great. This is unfinished. This is white polished from Shapeways. And this is your standard, I believe this is a re-release. Let's go ahead and take a look at the rear suspension. I'm going to go ahead and talk and take things apart. What I did is I took my lead from Tamiya with what they did with the Super Hornet and created this this kind of little rear brace for the rear shocks so that it would lower the mounting point of the rear shock and thusly drop the car suspension. I think it's almost about an inch lower now. And it did not affect the articulation one bit. You can see from the side here that there is no interference between this arm and the top arm of the transmission. And as you fully compress the shock absorber, again, you're not going to see any kind of interference. The twisting still works just as like original. There we go. And we can show you here how to install it by taking it off. So we have 3 screws here. This is the standard screw where you would normally mount the shock absorber. So we take the shock absorber off, and these 2 screws retain. This lower one here will actually hold the entire assembly together, and the top one does 2 things. It will hold the assembly together as well as give it a mounting point for the shock absorber. So as we take the bottom one out, this is a Tamiya self-tapping screw. It is very important that when you receive these pieces here, this is going to have a hole inside. The hole is 2.2 millimeters, which is too small for this screw. The reason I make it 2.2 millimeters is so that when you receive it, you can drill it out to 2.5 to give a very nice biting surface to that. And lastly, we're going to pull this one out here. And there we have it. So this is kind of an interesting piece here. Since I only had one mounting point, I had to take advantage of the axle tube to center it. Okay, so we basically put our screw here. This is a standard 12 millimeter self-tapping Tamiya screw. What's interesting about this lower mount here is that this tube fits snugly into it. This means that when you thread a screw into the lower one, you want to make sure that it does seat all the way into the hole. We'll take this screw again, here again, 12 millimeter. When we thread this in, it's very important that we do not over torque it. This isn't very easy to strip, but because it is nylon, when it stops, that's it. You don't have to apply any more torque to the screw. Okay, and the screw head will sit flush on the outside. When it comes to the shock mount, I am a massive fan of using these these Tamiya shock collars. These are just a little brass tube. I believe they're 6 millimeters long. And this is designed so that you can basically put this through the eyelet on the shock, set her in place here, and then you've got this screw. This again is a self-tapping Tamiya screw. I believe it's 18 millimeters long. And we are going to take a washer, place it in here, pass the screw through it. And the reason I like to use the washer in place of this, in this little gap here, is it really makes sure everything is nice and neat and tidy. Do you have to do it this way? Absolutely not. But this is, again, this is my recommendation. This is how I do it. So it's definitely a good starting point if you are new to the hobby. All right, let's screw that in there. And again, when it stops, it's done. Okay, you don't have to really torque it down. Don't forget to screw this upper one in as well. And that's it. This is a pretty simple installation here. 3 screws there, 3 screws here. There is an option for this whole set here. I'll show you right now what that is. What's kind of cool about 3D printing is I can do whatever I want to do. And I decided I wanted exhaust pipes. On this side of the horizontal cross member, on this region and on this region here. So for these two and for these two, you can take this little exhaust pipe set here. Has 2 little pegs there. You put a little bit of adhesive on it. Pass it straight through there. And there you have it. Twin exhaust. You can get 2 of those and have quad exhaust. I just thought it'd be kind of cool. What's interesting too is that these will also work on the exact same cross member that I've just designed for the Midnight Pumpkin. It is currently in the prototyping stage, but as soon as I get a print, we'll go ahead and do a video on that. Oh, let's do a little close up here. You can see that we have the little 6 lugs. So on the other side, we see that the original style has these 4 little pegs, which you would find on the Wild one. Whereas the Rising Fighter has the hex drive. So here's our Rising Fighter wheel that I've rescued from the garbage, and it goes back in. Let's go ahead and mount this guy right up there. I hope you like that upgrade. I know that cars like the Rising Fighter tend to get overlooked in the world of upgraded aftermarket parts. Very few people want to spend extra money on a kit that ultimately costs 60 bucks. I do wish that this project was done. This is my project Hornet 3, so you can kind of see the Hornet-inspired decals on the hood and on the side. So it's got some additional work and decal work, paint touch-ups, and all these stuff to do to the outside, but this is the direction I'm going. I had a lot of people ask about this car, so I wanted to mention these. You can also see some of my other versions of this rear suspension on good old Superfly over here. If you have a Tamiya Hornet, this rear suspension, again, it's lifted very similar in design from the Super Hornet. A Super Hornet rear suspension brace will not work on the Hornet because of the geometry on top. This one is designed to directly line up with the angle of the upper mount on the Hornet rear shock. So if you do have a Hornet, this will work. This will also work on a Grasshopper with the Hornet rear suspension upgrade. So you have to have these sliders and the different mounting points up top for the Grasshopper. If you don't have effectively the Hornet rear style suspension, this will not work. I also do make an exact replica of the rear suspension on the Super Hornet. I know these kits are often hard to find because they do come on a parts tree. So if you have a Super Hornet that is in need of one of these, you can snag those. If you are interested in putting one of these on your CW01, like your Lunchbox, your Pumpkin, your Unimog, again, I do have one of these coming out specifically for those very, very soon. Thanks again, folks. Stay tuned for some upcoming projects. I've got many things on the wings here. In fact, I am also going to do, against all of my better judgment, I'm going to do an installation of the lighting on the Willys Wheeler. So this is going to be a walkthrough of how I wire things when it comes to my own lighting, my own LEDs, my own resistors, as well as incorporating the light kits. So I'm sure that's gonna be an interesting one. If you like this video, please hit the little like button and subscribe You can also find me on Facebook and Instagram at Ampro Engineering, and a link to my Shapeways page where all of these are available is in both the description as well as at the end of this video. Thank you so much, and before you go, please check out the band Blue Pinto. They are the ones that provide all the audio for these videos, and a link to their Facebook is also at the end of the video. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the next upgrade.